Welcome to the Black Doctor Collective podcast. We as Black doctors are in a unique position. We can change our communities, healthcare, and the world. Of course, we start by changing the way we see and value ourselves. I'm your host, Dr. Shanika Horn, pediatrician and physician coach, travel extraordinaire. I am so happy to have you here and listening. So let's get into it. Hello. First of all, it's Black History Month. So regardless as to what the government is saying, we still celebrating diversity around these parts, okay? I'm going to talk to y'all this week about how to not necessarily avoid awkward conversations, but how to create safety when approaching a conversation that is high stakes or feels uncomfortable. And I say this from the lens of course, I always talk from the lens of negotiation, right? But negotiation loosely meaning any conversation you have where you're trying to come to an agreement with someone, right? So sometimes that is when you're first starting a job, but sometimes that's while you're in the job and someone's asking you to do a new role or there's some new opportunity that pops up and you want to create the conditions around that. How do you have those conversations when you feel internal discomfort? So I'm coming right out of a coaching call with my client. So I'm going to tell you her story and I'm going to tell you my story about a conversation I had last week that follows this exact same theme. So stay tuned to figure out how to have like super awkward conversations with employers or with team members, with coworkers. So that's what we're talking about today. So there's a funny thing that we do. I mean, I guess it's not that funny. It's people pleasing, right? There's a thing that we do when we're going into a conversation with someone that we have hopes and desires around what should come out of this meeting that we keep internally, right? We just hope that those things are going to come to fruition. And so we go into the meeting with all these like preemptive ideas and things usually, when we are like that, things don't usually go as planned. So for example, my client was talking about being signed up for a committee, right? Actually, she was asked to attend something. And then she said, yeah, that sounds great. Sounds like a great event. Like, yeah, I'm definitely interested. And then the next email she got pretty much had her on the planning committee, which is like a totally different commitment from like attending, right? Like someone's asked you to come to something. It's not the same thing as helping plan something. And for me, I never liked a group project in school. I don't like to be on anyone's planning committee. Take me out the group chat. Just tell me where I need to come and attend. Get somebody else to do it. Okay. So I'm listening to her tell this story about like, they kind of voluntold her to do this thing and she is trying to figure out, like what next. I find often when this comes up, we often examine it from the lens of, can I do this thing? Like, how much would it take out of my time if I had to do this thing? We try to figure out a way to make it work, even if it's not something we're like really interested in, because we don't want to upset another person. We don't want to cause some kind of disruption. People hate to ruffle a feather. So that's where she was kind of thinking, like, and I asked her straight up, do you actually want to plan this event? And she's like, no, I don't really have the bandwidth for it. So my next question, of course, was, why not just say that? And the response is just something that I'm so familiar with and I've heard many people say before, but it's that, she was hoping to have a relationship with the person who is heading the committee, right? It's someone she respects and plans to work with in the future and hopes that they would have that kind of foundational relationship that would allow, things to evolve nicely in the work environment, right? Like there's just a future relationship that she envisions. So because of that, the stakes feel high. She doesn't want to piss this person off. She doesn't want them to be upset with her. So she's trying to figure out how to maybe just, compromise on the fact that she doesn't actually want to do it, but maybe not doing everything, maybe just helping enough so that person would be satisfied, right? Like, this is where we compromise. But truly, she doesn't have the bandwidth, which means that if she signed up for this thing, she's either going to have to drop the ball on something else, she's going to resent having to go to this thing, or she's just not going to do a great job because she's going to try to juggle everything. So none of those outcomes are the outcomes we want. And if any of those came to fruition, she would damage this potential relationship. We don't like to create the result we're trying to avoid. That's what we don't want to do around here. So she planned to have a meeting with this person just to hear what they had in mind, to see if there was something that she could maybe do, or if it wasn't, then she would refuse it. But going into a meeting this way, knowing you don't want any parts of this project, but still trying to figure it out, can set yourself up for a little bit of a disaster. Here's why. Again, this is someone you want to please. So you're going to be way more inclined to sign up for the thing because you are face to face with them now, and you really don't want to disappoint them face to face. That's even worse. The other part of it is you knew going into the meeting that you had no intentions of being a part of this project, right? So now you feel like a little sleazy that you went in knowing you didn't want a part of it. And so how are you going to convince yourself to back out of it in front of this person? Because you should have just said that probably before going into the meeting and not wasted their time. So rather than to feel like, oh my God, I totally wasted their time, they're going to hate me even more than I anticipated, I'd rather just do what they're asking me to do. So there's going to be two ways in which you're creating this uncomfortable scenario going into the meeting, and the only way out of it is going to feel like doing the very thing you never wanted to do in the first place. I think all meetings should have a premise. So I advise my client, we talked through it and the feelings around it and why, I explained all of these things. We talked through all of these points about why we wouldn't want to go into this meeting this way and what are the potential harms in doing it this way. And so the advice here is don't go into a meeting with someone on the premise that you're looking to commit to something you're not looking to commit to. I said, if you want to meet this person and you want to establish a relationship with her and that's actually your goal of the meeting, then you need to say that and be clear that it's not to sign up for this project or this event. And of course, we have internal feelings about that because it's like, oh, how do I say that? And like, how do I balance that? And her and I talked about how to manage that. But you will feel sleazy knowing you went under false pretenses, and it's going to be really hard to back out of that kind of meeting. So I always say, go into it with a premise, go in authentically, just tell her outright, hey, I got invited to this event. It looks like based on these emails is a little bit of a misunderstanding. I can't actually participate in the planning. I am, however, so interested in meeting with you. I think there's potential for us to work together in the future. If you still want to have this meeting so that we can just chat, I would love that. If you don't have the time, also no pressure. What that does for you to say that authentically and truly, just honestly, is frees yourself from the emotional burden of trying to navigate that in real time in a meeting that you agreed to under false pretenses. That's just one way to really get out of an awkward situation. Like up front, just stating that this is what I'm coming for and that there has been a miscommunication, and I want to make sure that that's clarified before we even continue. Because the further you go down a road after a miscommunication happens, the harder it feels to unentangle yourself. Disentangle? Yes, disentangle yourself from that scenario. So her next question was, this just seems so obvious. It seems like the best thing to do because even setting the premise of this conversation is relieving. It takes the stress off of me going in there and then trying to figure out how to tell her that I don't want to be a part of the planning. Why didn't I just do this to begin with? So, of course, here comes the judgment because our brain loves to judge. My brain is Judgy McJudgerson, always likes to layer in the judgment of like, that just seems so simple. Like, why would I have done it any other way? I can't believe I've been doing this way this whole time. And so I bring up the issue of like safety. Everything that we do is to create safety in our life. I think as Black people, as Black women, especially in spaces that are not predominated by us, it has not always been safe to just advocate for yourself, to set the premise of how you want things to go, to say no to things, to not just go along to get along. For a long time, for years, for centuries in this country, that has not been an opportunity that has been afforded to us. I think we're one of the first generations to really be able to do that without like deep, lasting repercussions. And so it is a skill we are learning as we live. So I don't think it's innate for us to want to be upfront, to say clearly what it is, to voice our desires out loud. I don't think we have a lot of historical evidence that that works in our favor. I think we have a responsibility to create safety for ourselves. And I think as doctors, we are in the position to do so because we have front loaded so much time and so much experience in order to have this like expertise that we cannot be easily replaced. Even though they would like you to believe that we can be easily replaced, that is not true. It takes way too much time to learn all the things that we have learned and to keep learning that. So because we're in that position, it means that we can find job opportunities in other places. The job market exists for us. Knowing that gives us a certain power to be able to say what we need to say, to be able to lead conversations the way we need them to go. Because we have front loaded that, because we have taken time and years and money, we are supposed to be able to do that. Not everybody knows how to do that. Not everybody's been trained on how to do that. Not everybody's willing to do that. But for the most part, if you are of this mind, if you're in this podcast, you hear me talking about this all the time, we are in the positions of power and we need to exercise that power. And some of that power comes from being very clear and authentic about what we want. So I've mentioned before that I'm in an active negotiation and I'm always a little hesitant to talk about it because it does feel like a little scary and uncertain. But I'm going to share with you a conversation that I had last week with the employers. And the premise of this is the practice is run by a pediatrician and her husband. Her husband is not clinical. And he has been more like the business end. Like a lot of the conversations we have that are business or negotiation relations has gone through him. What I have found is that because he's not clinical, he doesn't always know, what's a competitive market rate, what's industry standards. And so sometimes the negotiation feels uphill because I have to start from a place of explaining, well, it's an industry standard that I get paid to be on call, right? Especially as an hourly employee. And then having to bridge this gap of knowledge about how things work in the medical field to then go ahead and to create the baseline from which I'm negotiating. I think it just makes it a way more complicated conversation than I even want to have. It feels energetically exhausting to me. So at some point, in the months that I was working there, I just reached out to the pediatrician and I just told her straight up, like, these negotiations don't work because negotiating with someone who doesn't have a medical background, doesn't understand the industry and the standards and what is a competitive rate means that there's just so much back and forth. And I really don't want to keep having these kinds of conversations. So we agreed that my conversations would go through her. Okay. Now, y'all may or may not know, I definitely was, heading out the door on this place because of just a variety of things. And we re-entered the negotiation about what would it mean to stay in this place? What would it take? And so we've been having conversations for a while, and I created a role. Like I, came up with this job description about what would need to be in place, what I would like to do and work on. And it was way more of a collaborative approach because they have a need and it's a need that I would be interested in filling. And so we're, working together to create this position, et cetera. So now we get down to the compensation part of it. And we're going to have this call on compensation. And she asks, can her husband attend the call? Now, my inner amygdala, who I call Amy very fondly, Amy is very much fight or flight. And at this point, she does not enjoy conversations with this man. So that text came to me asking, is it okay if he's on the call? And Amy was like, we don't want to talk to this man. But I also wanted to have the conversation about compensation. Like it needs to be had, right? I can't avoid it altogether. So I was wavering between, well, you know what? If it doesn't work out and if he starts from this place of like a lack of knowledge around the industry, I'm not going to spend time educating him on what it means, what the standards are. I just need to be able to go into this conversation with people who are well-versed on the position that we're discussing. And so I was going to text back like, okay. And in my mind, just prepare myself for two options, either that he was going to require some explanation, which I felt like I'm not interested in giving, or that I was going to have to defend some part of what I was presenting. And it just felt energetically heavy to do that. So I didn't respond right away. I kind of thought about it. And actually, I reached out to my boyfriend, who's like, I think is a master negotiator. And I just said, hey, I'm supposed to have this conversation later this afternoon. And here's the scenario. The husband wants to be on the call and he knows the full breadth. And I'm not giving y'all all the scoop. I'm being very political about how I talk about this interaction because this is an opportunity that I am pursuing. And so, of course, I don't want it to be like there's just some things that just don't need to be on Zuckerberg's internet. Okay. So he knows the full story of like my relationship with them and everything that's been going on and the work I've been doing. And so he said, well, why not just say what you want to say, which is that you don't want to negotiate from this place. Like this is not the starting point that you want to have a conversation from. And if he's prepared to start from a place of knowledge where he understands what the industry rates are and he can negotiate from there, then there's no problem with him being on the call. And of course, my brain is like, duh, that's obvious. Like, why wouldn't I just say that? That would just clarify everything and we would come into the call with the expectation set. So I was my client. Like my client this week was like, duh, why wouldn't I just tell this other person that like, I'm very interested in meeting you, but I don't actually want to be a part of this event. But I mean, if you still want to meet, I would be glad to do that because I do think we have a potential partnership in the future. So her response of like, duh, was the same response I had last week of like, this just seems so obvious to just be clear, right? But it's not obvious. And the reason I say that is because I don't think we've had the privilege of being able to advocate for ourselves historically. I think about like my mom's generation and prior generations where that just was not an option. And so who would have taught me to advocate? Who would have shown me that this was acceptable? I think I am building confidence and safety in asking questions and in negotiating and learning this for the very first time. I think you can see that in the way that the next generation is way more outspoken about what they want and don't want, to the point where people make fun of Gen Z because they're just out here demanding all kinds of stuff. They want to work from home. They are willing to say upfront all the things they want and don't want. Like they are so good at expressing their boundaries. But I think that came through us, where we were the first generation to start sampling what a boundary looks like and what it means to actually get what we want. And so I think in this coaching container that I have, it is that we all have this desire to ask for what we want, but we haven't had it modeled for us. We haven't had it reinforced. And we've adapted a lot of passive ways from the people ahead of us, our mentors, our parents, our attendings, that we have to unlearn. So I automatically process it this way because that allows me to release the self-judgment of like, why wouldn't I just be honest and upfront? Like, there's no loss there, because I did send that as a text message. I replied to her asking about her as being on the call. And I said like, hey, yeah, you know what? He can be on the call as long as he understands our starting place is from here and not from me having to explain why I'm asking for the rate I'm asking for and, justifying it by showing the evidence across the industry and all of that. And she was like, yeah, no, totally. So because of that text, we went into the conversation and it was smooth. We were able to start from where we set it at, not from this place that I initially anticipated, which would have caused a lot more stress. And I think potentially would not have worked out because I already was like willing to just not have to argue. Like, I'm tired, right? We're in the political space where everything is exhausting. And I think I'm at that space, which sometimes is a good space, right? Where you are willing to just walk away from a deal. I think when you have really been clear about what it is you want and you know what your deal breakers are, it makes it so much easier to just go into a negotiation being very clear. Like, okay, this is what I'm looking for. And if we can't come to that agreement, no problem, no pressure. I'm happy to go on my way. You can keep looking for someone who's going to meet your need, and I can keep looking for a place that's going to meet my need. And it feels so much more neutral when I'm coming from that place, when I'm rooted in my value, when I'm rooted in what I know to be true and what I want and what I deserve and all of that. So all that to say, it just reduced the discomfort of going into the call by just saying that. And for my client, the same thing, like her sending an email to clarify the purpose of meeting with this colleague is to get to know her and to think about future collaborations, not to sign on to an existing event that she has no interest in planning, creates just so much of a better conversation because we're setting a baseline. This can be applied, obviously, to any conversation that feels awkward, where if you set the agenda, you set the goal, you set the tone, it relieves a lot of the stress. I talk sometimes about what it means to be a leader, even when you're not in a leadership position. And this is just yet another example of that, where you can set the tone for something, for a conversation, even if you are not the leader of that meeting, even if you are not the facilitator, even if you feel like you're not in a position of power, you can still set a tone. And then the other side of that, so here's the objection that sometimes comes up for us in our brain is, well, what if that doesn't go well? What if things go awry because I tried to set the tone or because I stated a boundary? Okay, what if it doesn't go well, right? Like, you get to ask yourself that and answer the question. What is the worst case scenario? For my client with setting up this meeting, if that person did not receive that well, if she was like, oh, what would be the point? And I don't need to meet with you. And, if she got upset by the fact that my client did not want to participate in this project, is this the person that she was hoping to create a relationship with? Probably not, right? Because the person she was hoping to create a relationship with would be someone who was respectful of her boundaries. That's a little lower stakes because it's not someone she works for. This is not even someone in her direct department, but it's still someone she thought potentially she could have a connection with. But that's the thing. If you want to establish a connection with someone, it has to be someone you value. And do you want to be in relationship with someone who does not value you or does not respect your boundaries? Probably not. I would hope not. In my case, what's the worst case scenario would be, well, two worst case scenarios I could think of. One is like they don't agree and they want to argue in the meeting about it, which, in again, the worst case scenario is that I just walk away from the deal because I had already accepted that that was an outcome that I was willing to allow to come to fruition. And then the alternate would be that they were offended in my message and didn't even want to have the meeting or something, which I think would be extreme, but who knows? People react in all kinds of ways. And again, that still would mean the opportunity would have fallen through, and that's still something I was okay with allowing to come to fruition. So the thing is, you get to weigh the potential outcomes, and are you willing to risk that? If you're not willing to risk those potential outcomes, that's also okay, but that's an intentional decision now. Am I willing to risk it or am I not? Rather than just kind of going along with whatever someone else is proposing because it just brings out some vague discomfort and you don't really make a conscious decision of like, oh, I'm avoiding this because of the risk without even examining what the risks are. So that's my message for this week. It's Black History Month. We get to advocate. We get to speak up for ourselves. I think all of these things are the things that are going to keep us afloat in this time. We get to control our immediate environment and not go crazy by focusing on things that are outside of our control. There are things that are immediately within our purview that we can control, that we can speak up about, that we can advocate for. And the number one thing to advocate for is yourself. If you can control nothing else, you can control yourself. That is a privileged thing to say, I think. As a physician, I recognize that. I think as a Black person, again, it has not always been afforded to our community. As a woman, that's not always been afforded to our community. But right now, for me, where I am as a Black woman physician, I'm affording that to myself. So I will advocate for myself. That is within my locus of control. And I will create the safety to be able to do that. So to be able to walk away from something, I need to know what I'm walking towards. I need to know that there's safety and support systems set up for me so that if I were to like lose income, can I still survive? If I were to lose this job, whatever, would I be able to survive? You can answer those things for yourself. And if the answer is no, I wouldn't be able to survive, then you have a responsibility to set up the systems to be able to survive. So like I knew that medicine was unsafe for me coming straight out of training. And I was very hesitant, not necessarily like consciously so, but I had a major hesitation to signing up for it because it did not feel safe for me. And what ended up happening was that I created alternate forms of income, alternate interest, alternate ways to engage with my community through the coaching program, by being a coach in the Dr. Coach School, and all of these other ways that helped me generate income so that I don't rely on medicine in this way. Because when you rely on medicine this way, when it's your whole identity and when it's your primary income, you lose so much power there. But if you are able to create identities outside of medicine, if you are able to create income outside of medicine, they can't hold you. They cannot hold you. And you are much more likely to ask for what you want. You are much more likely to move when things are not going the way they need to go, when your safety is in threat, when the way you practice is out of whack, when your values cannot be upheld, when patient outcomes are worsening. You can get out of there because you have built a safety net. And in building that safety net, you get to be your authentic self. So I can ask for what I want. I teach my clients, even if medicine is their primary source of income, I build a safety net with a contract. They know exactly what their contract says. No one can BS them and tell them something else. And they can ask questions all along the way to make sure that everything that's happening is done with integrity, that aligns with their values. They're not committing to things they don't want to be committing to. That is the way to be sustainable. That is the way to help yourself. That is the way to be safe in a world that is completely unsafe for Black and brown physicians. for women. So let me know what you guys are doing to build safety in your life. It's a big question. I want you to ponder it. In what instances in your life do you feel completely reliant and completely powerless? And how can you change it? How can you move towards getting more power for yourself or having that power be intrinsic to you and not extrinsic? That's a heavy question, but I want you to think about it because you are not trapped. You are not stuck. You have options. So many of my clients come just knowing that there is an alternative and they just need to help to find it, which is what we do in this program. And we talk through and we create and we build systems of safety so that they can practice medicine in a sustainable way, right? In a protected way, in a valued way. That is the way these systems are going to be upheld. All the shenanigans that's going on in the world, those systems will collapse. But this, where we build with certainty and safety, these will last. These will outlast any administration, any crazy policy, because that person is a changed person and that person relies on themselves to create their own opportunity. That is a place of power. So if you're ready for that kind of power, just hit me up. I'm ready for you too. Let's go. It's 2025. We can't be reliant on anything outside of ourselves anymore. Have a good week. Bye. Thank you so much for listening. Please subscribe to the podcast. And what I want you to do next is link us everywhere you can. Instagram at The Black Doctor. Just become part of our collective. I want you here. Thanks. Until next time. Bye.